Back with a solo Q&A, and if you are anything like me, you're probably in pretty high spirits given world current affairs, financial affairs, and how the mood feels in the camp at the moment. I've got 24 questions to answer, and I am excited to dive into them right now. Let's start off with number one, and that is recently I've thought about how we all present ourselves differently depending on who we're with. We're one person with someone at work, but I feel like my true self when I'm with my brother, for example. And shouldn't we all strive to be our genuine selves all the time? Where is the fine line in that sense? That's a nice, deep question for us to start off with. And I have a relatively well formed opinion on this that we shouldn't be our full and genuine self in every single circumstance. And that maybe flies in the face of some advice online where people talk about authenticity as a really big buzzword. I think if you show up 100% as yourself in every single interaction, it's not always going to be helpful to everyone you encounter. It's not always going to be polite to everyone you encounter. And it's certainly not going to allow you to come across as well as possible in every encounter if that is indeed your aim, which it maybe isn't always. A few examples for this come to mind. And I think if you are perhaps somebody that's a deeply curious and inquisitive person and you're in conversation with maybe somebody at work and they're going through a difficult time, on a professional level, it may not be appropriate for you to pry and ask about the ins and the outs of their situation and all the different details. And I think that could be the case for somebody outside of work as well. Sometimes you maybe meet up with somebody you don't know incredibly well. And if your natural, authentic, full self is to be curious, inquisitive, want to gather all the information, want to talk, sometimes you have little to no right to ask more about a situation. And you may just have to show up as somebody who doesn't follow their curiosity at all times 100%. A second example for me to maybe bring this to light more is internally at work, I'm always switching my energy. My perhaps more natural, authentic self is to be charismatic, fast paced, to be the sales guy who deals with clients and gives them confidence in what they're going to buy from us and try and really bring that energy. Whereas I also need to be capable of more data led, number led, quieter, and more level paced conversations with colleagues who work in departments where their natural disposition is to be quieter, less extroverted, more of a steady level. And that's not to say that either one is better than the other. But if I showed up continually as excitable, high energy, passionate, and I think you see this with different guests that I have on the podcast, I have to adjust my energy to have the best possible conversation with them. And of course, I'm more naturally upbeat and quite intense at times. I will have to turn that down given who I'm around. And again, like a funny example to bring this to life, just this week on a personal level, I wouldn't be my most dialed up and high energy self around older relatives. And that was the case just earlier this week when my elderly Italian neighbors who grew up beside my family house, I call them my nonna and nonno, which is Italian for grandma and grandpa. And I saw Nonno for his 99th birthday. And I didn't come charging into his house and I wasn't loud and crazy and over the top. Not that I always am, but I can lean that way in some social situations. In the like, so for example, consider this yourself. If you're being fully your authentic self, you're probably going to behave differently when I go to the golf simulator with my friends or on my way to a football game than I am with older relatives. I want to be a little slightly more dialed down version. As ever with these answers, the importance is probably in the detail, and I think I aim overall to spend time with people who allow me to be free to be myself in terms of my very closest friends, but also people that hold me to a high standard where I may have to rein in some maybe authentic urges or behaviors that I have in a form that means I can still be somebody that's nice to be around, even when I'm maybe not giving absolutely everything. That's 100% what I would want to do in that instant. Question number 2, what are the critical success factors of a top 1% podcast? Okay, let's share 3 off the top of my head. Number 1, you want to have a focus on a topic or a small number of topics which you have a deep interest in. And this is going to ensure that you have a lasting interest in what you're going to be talking about. There's not going to be a fleeting burst of passion that you suddenly want to talk about crypto for the next 6 months because we're in the middle of a bull run, and then you burn out and you never want to talk about crypto ever again. I managed to find something that I'm really interested in, which is a little bit broader than most podcasts should do in terms of wanting to be super successful. But I love talking about self-development. I love talking about brain, body, business. And that keeps me showing up for over 4.5 years now. And that's showing no signs of slowing down, which is great. Second part to that would be, you should probably, if you want to be a top 1% podcast, do over 100 reps by releasing over 100 episodes. I think unless you are somebody that has a pre-existing large audience from another platform, then you need to accumulate volume of content in terms of episodes to give yourself a chance of reaching an audience. I don't know anyone that I can think of who had under 10,000 followers on one platform or another who got into the top 1% of podcast faster than 100 episodes. I just don't think you have the launch pad to drag them across. I had about 10 or 11,000 followers on Instagram in March, April 2020 when I launched the podcast. And I didn't become a top 1% show for 3 years. I think it was like June or July 2023 when I got into the top 1%, maybe March 2023. So that should give people the understanding that if you want to have that whole tagline of top 1%, or you want to have that validation on listen notes and the number of people that are listening and tuned in, then there's a lot of time and investment involved, and it covers that kind of consistency box, which of course would be a critical success factor. Number 3 is hosting skill wise, because I think to get in the top 1%, you should be relatively good at hosting podcasts. And I would advise that you become somebody that listens well to what has actually been said and not try and respond to something that you hope they might have said, or respond rushing towards the next topic or point or area that you have on your agenda or on your plans. Because the best conversations that we have on this podcast are when we go a layer deeper than the guest's initial answer. So I come back with a point that maybe compares to their point, or something that goes, oh, like, what do you mean by that? And we get to go a layer deeper than that. And I think that is the hallmark of some of the top podcasts that I listen to. And the ones I try to create are ones where, as a host, I create space to go beyond. And I do that by listening to what has genuinely been said, not what I hope has been said or expect to be said, because you could be surprised, and you should be surprised by some conversations that you have. Number 3, we'll do a similar format. You posted you've already done £1.7 million in sales this year. How have you grown from last year's 1.1? We'll split it into 3 again. Number 1, the most important thing that I did, I would say personally, is that I grew the existing customer base that I'd won over the last 3 years. So this is year 4, through doing a great job for them in the first 3 years and having momentum of them trusting what I do in one area to entrust me and allow me to what would be called cross-selling into other products as well. Furniture-wise, I'll give the example that if I did the mattresses for a particular university one year, best believe I'm making sure I do a really good job on it. And then the next year, I'm going to ask about their desk chairs, their sofas. I'm going to ask about projects they're going to do for amenity space that they're going to refurb. I'm going to ask about bed bases and when they're changing those at that particular residence. I want to be involved in as many of the product lines and services that I can sell to them as possible, and customer revenue will grow off the back of that. So I have a customer, which is a university in the north west of the UK. And in my first year with me, they spent about £25,000 on mattresses. In my second year, they spent about £80,000 on mattresses, but they also spent about £40,000 to take me well over 100k with them on sofas. Now, this is such a specific example, but that is how you grow from a few £100,000 in my first year to 800,000 odd pounds in my second year to over 1.1 to now over 1.7. You get in the door, you do a great job, and you expand your product offering. And that's important that you have that available within your business as well. Number 2, I secured a major project this year, which on its own was over 520k. So to see me go from 1.1 to 1.7, it's quite easy to join the dots when you've got a really chunky singular project. Whereas I think my biggest ever single order previously was probably about 179, 180k, something like that. So by getting one singular deal, which is over £500,000 in its entirety, is going to help me to do that. And that would always be the best way to get to really, really large figures, is to have singular deals, because some deals of even a lesser size are still going to require as much work as the one that is much bigger and pays you more, but you get to spend a similar amount of time in it, but you just get paid more. Of course, I will say there does come challenges with that, but I like to think that if I'm going to do over 2 million or over 2.5 million in the future, there's probably going to be one or two deals within it in their own right that are really, really chunky. I don't think I would want all of the 2 million or all of the 1.7 that I'm sitting on just now to be made up of 2 or 3 big projects. I like to have multiple customers that are spending anywhere between 50 or even less than that, 25 to about 150k. That's great, and it's good for diversity, because if one of those falls off, I'm not in big trouble. But I think getting a single big deal has been a big help. Number 3 that I would say has been the most important in getting to 1.7 million already this year is I consistently topped up my new client conversations through weekly minimum prospecting inputs in terms of my outbound activity. By outbound activity, I mean emails, calls, LinkedIn. Given how fast I grew my client book to a number of different, what would be called active customers who spend annually with me, it would be really easy to get lazy and just look after those existing clients and do what I did in number 1, grow the revenue I had with them. That's a big error. Consistently topping up and having new conversations and doing new quotes and winning new clients who spend with you for the first time in this calendar year, in this financial year, has been a major key to get into 1.7. Because of some of the clients that spent over 1.1 million with me last year, some of them are spending no money this year, either through they just don't have any projects coming up, they don't have any budget, maybe they have gone out of business, maybe they've decided not to use me anymore. There's lots of factors that come into play, so you cannot just protect and hold on to what you've got. I know many people were listening to the last episode with David Hatt and Chris Burns, and we were talking about ethical marketing. You need to always be marketing for new clients to come in the top of the funnel, because no matter how good a service you give, some will fall out. Some of these circumstances will change. So in order for me to continuously grow and expand, I need to have more customers, not just looking after the ones that I have won and I worked hard to win. Quick drink and we'll go on to number 4. This is a challenging one because, well, let me tell the question first. Do you feel you have to stay in the UK despite the current decline? As in, hold the line and step up to the responsibility. If not you, then who? Would you feel guilty migrating to another country of choice to live the good life? I definitely think I'm a patriotic person about the UK, and I'm proud to be from the UK. I'm proud of what the UK has been over a long period of time. I am, of course, concerned about the decline. I think there was a statistic the other day, and it was showing, and we'll definitely talk about the market as this podcast goes on. The S&P 500, since Trump's election, has been rallying, meaning that the big companies, the business there, the growth there is looking fantastic. Meanwhile, the FTSE 100 is shrinking. So the biggest 100 companies in the UK are shrinking because of how our political environment is, how our fiscal environment is, how our productivity is as a nation as well. That is really concerning. And as somebody that is proud to be from the UK and is proud of the impact the UK has had on the world and the environment that I got to grow up in, is there an element of me wanting to stay and hold the line and step up to the responsibility? Yes, but there's only so much that individuals can do, because at a macro level, a big upper above us level, the environment's still really, really poor. Now, I'm probably going to get onto this in this podcast of why I think we're going to hopefully start to turn the corner, but I don't think it's going to come quick. Would I feel guilty if I moved away? No, not entirely, but I would feel upset that I was leaving my family behind to some extent. And that's probably been one of the biggest factors why you haven't seen me make a Dubai move, for example. I love spending time with my family. I'm extremely close to them. Would I want them to be remaining in the UK while it's falling to bits, or not falling to bits, but it's moving in a bad direction? Not so much. But I'm gonna get on in this podcast, I promise, to some sort of green shoots of hope I think that are gonna come down the track. But overall, I feel an attachment to the UK. I feel a duty to be here. I feel a duty to be a contributing person to here. But there's only so much the contributing members of the society can fucking take when it comes to tax and the environment that we're being put to deal with. And that is a message to different political parties that are currently absolutely taking us for a ride. Number 5, how do you handle the stress and strain of just how crazy the world is right now? Even the UK feels less safe than before. I bundled these 2 questions together because I want to give hopefully some green shoots as well. I spoke about in the last Q&A about compartmentalizing bad news, and that related to ill health within my family when mum got breast cancer in 2017, and it related to a work situation where the entire company got made redundant 12 weeks after I joined, and I just started a mortgage in, I don't know, March 2019. But it also extends to the global or national circumstances. And here's a quote I think you might like: "Life is good even if the world is on fire." And that is a phrase that Konstantin Kisin used when he appeared on Joe Rogan. We largely appreciate true connection and the good things when there's external pressure or negativity. So when circumstances are really challenging and you comparatively are in a good spot, you feel better about it. And that sounds like a bad thing, and it sounds like an unfair thing because you're benefiting while the world's fucked. But my life, if I look out and I zoom out, has largely been improving and getting better over the last few years. I've worked really hard to create a life that I lead, I'm happy with and proud of in terms of a fiscal sense, in terms of a mission sense, a purpose sense, a social sense. But in contrast, if I look at the whole country, I think it's increasingly negative, and I have pretty big fears over the state of society. People that listen to a podcast like this one, and a lot of the people that I speak to about where their life situation is going, is largely positive. But I think we're in an echo chamber of a few different things. Number one, agency, and linked to that's control, personal responsibility, and listening to content and doing things that are positive in our lives. Well, I think that a lot of what we see as larger macro factors around us in society are, as Constance said, the world is on fire. But my own circumstances and situation, and for those that I really spend the most time with, they're largely improving because of how they conduct themselves. So occasionally, I will say, the insanity spills into my life and theirs. Stuff like crime, the outrageous levels of tax that I'm paying anytime I get my salary on a monthly basis, and even some of the geopolitical stuff like wars and violence. And I'm going to get onto those as this podcast goes. That impacts all of us, but not as much as the things that we can dictate in our life. And that's not me telling you that having a good morning routine and is going to change everything, but having a career that we can rely on fiscally, having a business that we've built that we're proud of, having a family and a circle of friends and people you spend time with that make you feel good, having control and agency over your health and your body and your mind is bigger than if the UK continues to increase its tax situation and increase to become more unsafe in terms of the crime. Because something that both Joe Rogan and Konstantin touched on in that podcast was, in lieu of real problems, we create our own. And right now, I don't think we have our problems to seek because the external world is serving up enough issues that I'm content to just handle my own business without creating unnecessary hurdles for myself. And I think many of the people that listen to this fall into the same bracket. Number 6, a little bit of a lighter one. When in the shower, do you directly wash your feet or just watch the falling water and soap do the job itself? I have an option in the shower that I can turn to a jet, and I can take the handle down and I can wash my feet. I don't specifically apply soap to my feet, but I wash them down with the water and therefore the soap that is falling down. So I directly apply water, but I don't directly apply soap to my feet. Hope that helps. And unusual question, but keep them coming. Number 7, do we have a mental health crisis or a lack of resilience crisis? I was actually talking about this with Dad earlier this week, and we both came to the conclusion that every generation looks at the younger generation below them as weaker and less resilient. Think of the generation of World War II. They look at the people that came after them and they think, you don't know that half of the world, you don't know how hard it was for us growing up. Then the boomers look at the generation after that, or whatever the terminology was for what's correct. I lose track of Gen Z, Gen X, boomers, and millennials. We all look at the younger generation and think they've got it easier than we have. And that is largely because society is progressing in some forms and in some regards, because relative poverty is considerably less than it was in previous generations. And people in even the early 2000s would look at people who consider themselves in poverty nowadays and would think they maybe have access to better things than they did. I think there's a mixture of things at play here. I think there is a lack of resilience in society nowadays. I do think there's a mental health crisis, and I think there is some challenges around how people deal with stress, social media, hyper-processed foods, and obesity. I think how they deal with drugs and alcohol is in a worse position than currently. Albeit, you could look at previous generations and many of those sedated with things like drugs, alcohol. I think nowadays there's a lot of people sedating themselves with easy access to hyper palatable foods, easy access to, and we'll call it corn for the purposes of this in case YouTube demonetizes me. And those are all things that reduce your resilience and your ability to deal with hard times, because if you never deal with hard times or you never face the music and go in towards the challenge, then you can expect to not be ready when the real hard stuff comes. And I think that's why so many of the people that I'm close with really like hard physical training, because you are readying yourself for dealing with hardship when it comes through choice on a regular basis, such as turning up to the gym when it's freezing cold and you don't want to, and it's been raining all morning and you've had a horrible day in work, and you turn up and you're tired and you still go and do the session that you committed to doing. That's an act of resilience, an act of dealing with the pressure on such a small level. But you're voting for the kind of person that when, for example, the job is lost or the family member falls ill, you're able to stand up and deal with that, because you hopefully are somebody that's built some sort of mental calluses that you can deal with things that are tough on a smaller level, and so that can be reapplied on a larger level. So yeah, it's a difficult question for me to not get off the fence on, but I think we have a mental health crisis. I think it's undoubtedly that people are suffering in terms of mental illness, and I also think that feeds into it can feed into that by people having a lack of resilience and a lack of substantial quality habits that look after themselves. Number 8, who would you bring back out of Winston Churchill or Margaret Thatcher to run the country today? Well, touch wood, we're not going to end up in wartime, so I think that probably favours Thatcher over Churchill initially. And I think that Thatcher was somebody that reduced the size of the state. And I, as I've said on many podcasts, particularly ones with Andrew Craig, when we've gotten really into the size of the UK and the amount of money that's being spent in the UK in terms of on services and through the public sector, we need to reduce that, create efficiencies like they're doing with Elon Musk in the US under Trump, and make some significant savings. And I think Thatcher may be more inclined to do that. And I think a neoliberal small state approach would be perhaps more favourable than Churchill, who was very much a man of wartime and led during those periods. And touch wood, I hope we don't head into wartime. Number 9, what's going on with the trend for people supporting political figures on personal points and likability rather than professionalism and track record? Do you know what? The person that asked this is in favour of Trump, and I spoke about this with him offline. But I think some of the Kamala supporters were hurling that at Trump as well, because Trump is more likable than Kamala, and well, for people that listen to my podcast, definitely anyway, and maybe had less of a political background apart from his presidency period, where she'd worked in lots of different political roles and basically been a career politician. And then on the other side, you have people in the UK, for example, the Labour government, who have so many cabinet ministers who have no experience whatsoever in terms of a professional track record that would indicate they should be in the roles that they're in. Rachel Reeves, for example, as Chancellor, is economically completely illiterate. And I don't know if people do like them or they think there's personal points they like about them, but I think the quality of politician that we have access to nowadays means that we're seeing a trend for people going towards candidates that maybe have more energy or oomph for discussion, or ability, to come across well in discussion. I think that's a positive thing to some extent. But I think, and this is one of the biggest problems with the UK in particular, a lot of what's happening and a lot of what you see being implemented is happening behind the scenes by unelected bureaucrats and civil servants. And those people have maybe a track record of working in government, but not working in successful government and not working in government in a way that I would want to. So I'm not sure what the trend is going to be in the future, other than I do think people will continue to vote, probably even more so based on personal points and likability rather than potentially on track record, alongside the fact that I think more business people are going to be what the public demands and craves, but those business people, in order to get elected, will have to play the game in terms of social media, podcasting, how they present themselves, how they speak in bullet points, and how they deliver themselves. I think that's going to be very, very important. I don't think we're going anywhere away from the cults of personality. Number 10, how has the morning routine changed since your first episodes? We were back in lockdown restrictions in April 2020 when the podcast first started, but I pretty quickly during that lockdown period had a strong routine despite the different measures that were in place. I was very used to working from home, not in the role that I was at the start of lockdown, but the role that I had before that job was pretty much entirely remote based. So I had a pretty good idea that I would build a routine that meant that when I logged on the laptop around 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning, that I had set myself up for the day. And not a lot has changed in that regard because I continue to be remote based, albeit I have a lot of travel, Manchester, London, Leeds in recent weeks. And when I am at home, I have a really strong morning routine that still suits me. And there's not a huge change in that. I think just to recap it briefly, the main things that I do: I wake, I do the bathroom, I hydrate, have my supplements, my electrolytes. I do a little bit of stretching and mostly banded rotation work for my shoulders. That's the only real, touch wood, big injuries that I've had, albeit I had a little bit of sciatica when I've just started some high rocks training, but maybe that's a topic for the next solo Q&A to see how I am after that. It's on the mend. But I do a little bit of stretching and movement. I then do some gratitude journaling, albeit that fell off a little bit, but it's back now and I'm really, really benefiting from it. I write 3 things that I'm grateful for, what would make a good day today, and I have a positive affirmation for my intentions today and who I am. I then put on a podcast and I go outside for a walk for anywhere between 30 to 45 to an hour, depending how long I've got before my first calls or what I need to do. And that's largely the morning routine. I get myself ready in terms of hydration. I consume good content in terms of the podcast. I walk and get movement, and I do some sort of mobility so that I feel healthy and strong. And I check in on myself with some gratitude. That's probably the main fundamentals. If I'm in a hotel, for example, the only thing I really do that changes is I wake up, do the bathroom, hydrate, take some of my supplements, I gratitude journal, and then I go for a walk. It's pretty similar, so it's quite a repeatable routine. I don't necessarily need to have loads of equipment or things with me in order for me to do that, and I feel it sets me up well for the day. Number 11, how hard is it to attract in real life guests in Glasgow versus London or Dubai? In terms of Scottish guests, obviously not. It's completely fine in Glasgow, but I've probably only had out of, well, I don't know how many studio podcasts that I've done, but I think I've had 3 guests that have commuted specifically to Glasgow for my podcast, which is really cool. But out of the number of episodes that I've done, everyone else in Glasgow has been within, I don't know, an hour and a half of travel, whereas the other 3 came from, I don't know, 3 or 4 hours away. In comparison, if I was in London or Dubai, there are people who are out there that are much easier to get on the podcast just because you're in their geography and in their location. And that's a real shame. That is the nature of Glasgow as a relatively small town or small city in the grand scheme of the content creation or even the entrepreneurial or the self-development world. So yeah, when you're in London or Dubai, it's considerably easier. Just this week, for example, Andy Elliott, the sales trainer, many of you may have seen him, the ripped, tanned, shouty, bald American guy who has a great energy about him. He was in Dubai and he's probably done 4 or 5 podcasts while he was there. Best believe I would have hoped if I was living out in Dubai full time, I probably would have been one of the podcasts that he might have considered doing. I might have had a shot at that. But while you're in Glasgow, you've got no chance, of course. You're not even on his radar. So that's definitely a consideration. And I think this is the first time I've spoken about this. I'm going out to Dubai for the first 2 weeks of December again, maybe stay for a little bit longer, depending how things go. And I'll be podcasting when I'm out there again. So I'll be looking to get guests on that I cannot get while I'm in Glasgow to host in person and have a conversation with. And I'm traveling under my own steam to do that. In the same way I went to London to interview Rory Lawson. I went to Leeds to interview Cruz Leeming, which is coming very soon, which I think you'll all enjoy. If you haven't heard of Cruz, I think you'll love that one. So yeah, that's a consideration. Like, would the podcast be bigger if I was based in London or Dubai or I spent more time there? Yes, it absolutely would. Yes, I'd be able to have more guests in person that I can't get while I'm here. But that is the nature of the game. Question number 12 follows on for that. Is the goal to have your own podcast studio? I don't think so. I think having my own studio in Glasgow, I would fall into I wouldn't get any of the benefits of having my own studio here. I use the green room a lot of the time. I've used Bulletproof Studios out in Airdrie. I've used G4 at Wishaw, and all of those are well equipped and great. And I don't think me having my own studio and saying to somebody, come to Glasgow to my own studio, is any different to me saying, come to the studio that I've rented for the next 2 hours. Number 13, how much time do you spend focused on dating or a relationship right now? I think in terms of my energy and focus towards it, I increased it after my holiday that I had to Ibiza in September, because I don't think you should maybe always, if you're wanting to just go and enjoy yourself fully on holiday, you maybe don't want to be starting off dating somebody brand new. I dabbled with Hinge, but I don't love it. I have been on a few dates, none more than the same person twice. So I've been open to it, but I haven't been all in on it. And I think I'm getting increasingly good at what I would call vetting, and that's deciding pretty early on whether her and I are going to be a match and making a decision based off that. Does that mean I'm not focused on dating? No, I think the right girl in my life would be a tremendous value add. And I think I could really add to their life as well. And I think that's the goal, to have a wife and kids and to be happily married and to have a contributing back and forth between the two of us. And for that, I think there probably does need to be more focus. Again, I mentioned I'm just off to Dubai, albeit Dubai is not an Ibiza holiday by any shape or form. So I don't think anyone you start dating would be panicking about that in the same way that you going to Ibiza on holiday for 4 days. But yeah, it's not been a major focus, but I think it's an important thing for me to consider, particularly at the age of 32. But I also don't think that if you chase it too much, as long as you chase it in the right way, I think you could chase it in terms of like seeking validation or chasing the one night stuff or the quick wins, so to speak. But I think if I spend my time, and whenever I spend time on dating, I do it with my best intentions, I think that's a healthier position for me to be in. Number 14, do you have a niche in content? And if so, what is it? I think, broadly speaking, it is self-improvement in the 3Bs: brain, body, business. Within brain falls mental health and clarity and performance. Within body follows health and wellness and physical performance. And then business incorporates career, business, how you spend your money, how you invest it, finance in that respect. Number 15, which guest surprised you the most? Not what you expected or gained unexpected value from. I always struggle with questions like this. I was just a guest on a podcast this week in London, a guy called Jay Lawrence on the Ambitious Mind podcast. I'm really looking forward to that one coming up. I think we had a great chat. It'll come out soon. And I said to him, I am so in the podcast, working on it. It often takes me to do a special episode like episode 250 where I reflect on 15 big lessons to actually think back about what have I learned that I can formally talk about? Because it's really easy sometimes during an episode, I'll be like, oh, so I just spoke to Stephen Beatty. I'll say, Stephen, and the episode will come out soon. I said, oh, Stephen, I learned this from this particular guest. How do you feel about that? That's something I'm really good at. But sometimes when I'm like, oh, which guest surprised you, or which one did you get unexpected value from? I think that's quite hard. But what I have prepared in advance for this episode is thinking about a kind of more financial one, which I think might surprise some people, that and it's underrated advice in that respect. I hosted UK finance YouTuber Damien Talks Money. This was back in 2023. And the show's grown a lot since then. So a lot of you might not have gone back or already listened to this episode. So maybe do that off the back of this episode. And Damien has got an incredibly successful YouTube channel, and he's really one of the good guys when it comes to personal finance. And the clue's in the name, Damien Talks Money. I knew the episode was going to be valuable when it came to probably financial insights that relate to money, but he gave an insight that was related to finance, but was also related into pursuing the best type of business and career for you. So simply put, Damien gave the advice about how important it was to have an emergency fund to give you a safety net so that you could go and pursue something you really wanted. Because he was working for a number of years in a really well-paid job in financial services at Paystream. And he took the time to build up a notable fund of around 6 months worth of accessible cash to cover mortgage, car payments, utility bills, living expenses, like things like groceries, basically. And by having this fund, it enabled Damien to know when the opportunity felt right to go all in on his YouTube and his content creation, he could do so for more than 6 months and make it work. And if it did work, he could just carry on. If it didn't, then he would just go back to work, but he wouldn't have created any sort of debt for himself. As it turned out, he didn't look back. He just totally succeeded, and he just grew and grew and grew. But worst case scenario, he had 6 months of paying for all the different basics that he had. No issues, no problems. He wasn't going to lose his house or lose his car or not be able to feed himself or have to take like a really bad loan. And I knew the episode was going to be valuable in terms of insight on finances. But I think that helps because at a deeper level, it helps people to know that when you have financial literacy and you tick those big boxes for yourself, you give yourself the best possible chance of working in something you care about as well. And we spoke about that with Andrew Craig. We actually brought up Damien on episode 200, which is a while ago now. and he was saying how proud he was that him and Damien did an episode together on Damien's podcast and spoke about the importance of him understanding an emergency fund meant that he became this YouTuber. So if that's not a kind of cool or underrated bit of advice, then I think that's really, really cool. And I think beyond that, in terms of like me getting unexpected value from a guest, I do my research pretty deeply, as you well know. So I'd never think that I'm massively surprised by what a guest shares unless we go somewhere totally new or deep with them. But I promise you that for episode 300, I'll do a deeper dive and I'll maybe do 10 lessons from the last 300 podcasts and maybe like 5 underrated lessons as like a bonus off the back of it. And I'll really take my time to prepare for that, I promise. Question number 16, what's been a silent sentimental goal that you've achieved that we as listeners might not understand the excitement of? I think most people listening to the podcast have a good sense of what gets me excited about the podcast. But in terms of like a silent sentimental goal, pretty early on, probably episode 63, something like that, I interviewed Joe Delaney. And Joe Delaney was somebody I'd watched on YouTube so much as a young guy. So to be on a Zoom call for a couple of hours together, recording for an hour for the interview, or an hour and a half for the interview itself, and then just chatting for 20, 30 minutes about training and stocks and shares and life and family was really, really cool. So that was one of those early moments that sentimentally I look back on really proudly, because I realized, oh, this podcast thing is quite cool. Like I can reach out to somebody that I've always looked up to and like their content, and I can platform them and have a conversation and ask them questions that I've always wanted to. And it just so happens that goes out to thousands of people who can enjoy the conversation as well. So on a sentimental level, getting to speak to somebody that I'd always wanted to speak to and speak to them on a level where we could produce something of what I think is value to the audience was really, really cool. And that definitely excited me. Number 17, and we haven't talked loads about Trump, but we might as well now, discuss the 3 most exciting prospects of a Trump second term. Lots and lots and lots, but we'll do 3. I think RFK, so Robert Kennedy Jr., him being part of the, not cabinet, but of Trump's government is going to be really important for tackling the food system in the US and aiming to provide and prove that America can become healthy again. And no matter your views on his approach to pharmaceuticals, he is undoubtedly correct about the quality of the food supply in the US, and the amount of chronic disease that people are suffering from is insane. Look at the obesity rates in the UK right now. The US is awful for that as well, because the quality of the food system, the quality of people's ability to control their appetite and regulate their hunger and regulate their like just general habits around health are so bad. And I think it does take somebody like him to come in and try to restructure that, because I'm all for personal responsibility and agency. But I think there's definitely macro factors in the US, and I think it's gotten worse in the UK, albeit nowhere near as bad as the US, that mean that people are fighting a losing battle sometimes for being as healthy as they could be. I guess the second most exciting prospect at the time of recording, many people will be nodding and smiling along, is the markets are responding incredibly well to a Trump presidency. The S&P 500's up, crypto, Bitcoin, and XRP in particular are booming because Trump is pro-growth. He is aiming to help people to hold on to as much of their earning power as possible. Lower tax, keep more of your money, have more autonomy. He's going to reduce things like tax on overtime, tax on tips, for example, which will help mid to low earners, I would say, in the hospitality field. He's talking about removing, I don't know if they call it capital gains, but whatever they charge on crypto, he's talking about removing that as well. The markets are responding really well because the sign is up internally in America that America is pro-growth. We are going to grow our way out of the problems that we have. And that for me is incredibly exciting. And I really, really hope that continues, both for my portfolio of investments in the S&P 500 and in crypto, but also for the direction of travel within the world. I think America being big and powerful and economically strong is vital, and it's got a lot of debt that he's going to have to deal with, but to grow their way out of that, I think, is the plan. And the third part, and this is maybe what I was aiming at when I was talking about the fact that the UK feels like it's in decline, is that I'm going to use a phrase. when America sneezes, the world catches a cold. And Trump's stance on how he wants a future America to look, particularly in terms of the integrity of the US's borders and controlling migration into the country, is something that I hope we see in the UK. If he can lead the way in that front and protect the integrity of how the US is governed in terms of the people that are in the country legally, then I hope that the UK will go that way too. Much of Europe, and most notably our neighbours in Ireland, have woken up to the threat of mass migration. And now that somebody like Trump is focusing on it, more of Europe is focusing on it, I hope that more people are less afraid of talking about their rightful concerns for the danger that mass migration poses to our culture and our safety. And I hope we start to see a massive reverse in how we've conducted ourselves in that way. And I think somebody like Trump and the influence that he'll have on the US should hopefully tip over into the rest of the Western world, because at the moment we are heading for real problems, and I think we're already witnessing some of those problems. And he can be a force that moves us away from that. Question number 18: how has the podcasting landscape changed since you first started CamBro Conversations? Well, for starters, I started during lockdown in 2020, and the focus now is massively more on video than it was just on audio back then. Back then, there was no real clips that people posted on socials. There was no short form. There was no reels. There was no TikToks. There was TikTok, but there wasn't podcast TikToks. So video has become much more important. I know I'm recording this at home, and I think most people who record a solo Q&A will be recording it at home, albeit they might have a studio-like setup. This is, touch wood, a workable setup for me in terms of quality. I hope you're still enjoying listening to me. And if you're watching on one of the smaller number that watch on YouTube, then I hope you can see me clearly, and it's delivering in that regard. But the podcasting landscape has changed massively in the quality of video that people are expecting. And I think podcasts that are purely Zoom or what I use is StreamYard based are struggling more because people expect it to look fantastic. And I also think that the clips that come from studios perform better to drive short form attention towards the long form stuff. So the podcasting landscape has definitely evolved, where I think most podcasts should be video led first. Even if you're recording over StreamYard, you should still be producing good quality clips. And the audio is benefiting off the back of the video being high quality to drive people across to that. That has been the biggest single change that I think we've seen. And I think we've seen a move towards the guys that are in studios doing bigger and better than the guys that are purely a remote setup. Albeit, I will say, I have seen tremendous success from having a podcast that interviews people all across the world and not restricting myself to being just an in-person podcast. I mentioned I'm taking the podcast to Dubai again. I've been to London. I've been to Leeds. I've been to other places to record shows. I think that's massively important, but I also know that next week I'm interviewing Zach Bitter, who is based in Austin, and he is an incredible guest that many people will get tremendous value from. And if I had been strict and said that I'm only ever going to speak to him in person, the chances of me going to Austin in the immediate future to record a podcast are pretty slim. So I still want to be able to bring that to you. But I do think the landscape has shifted towards people that are recording in studios and people that are making sure that their video is of good quality. Number 19 is sort of linked to that, and it links to what we're talking about with the Trump election. But how important was the use of podcasting platforms in the presidential campaigns? It was vital. People already were unsure of Kamala Harris and how authentic and how true she was. She was well known at the different rallies for being so reliant on her teleprompter. It was absolutely embarrassing. So when she had a debate with Trump on mainstream TV, and it went quite well for her, I think by all accounts people would consider that, albeit I think the fact-checking of Kamala versus Trump was laughably one-sided, considering the broadcaster that administered that debate. But I saw some stats, and I think I'm going to share them with you just now off the top of my head. I think Trump did something like 17 hours of podcasts, and Kamala did 5 hours. And Kamala's produced something like 5 million versus something like 60 odd million for Trump. I think Joe Rogan episode alone had something like 45 million plays, and YouTube actually choked out at one point, because I did this myself. You could search on YouTube for Joe Rogan, Donald Trump, and it would sometimes bring up the clips from the GRE clips channel, but it wasn't bringing up the full episode, which is insane. But anyway, that's besides the point. When Trump went onto the podcast, he was able to completely reach a demographic of voter who Of course, there were people on there that were already predisposed to vote for him, but there was a lot of younger voters and a lot of male voters, considering the podcast he went on, like Andrew Schultz, Lex Friedman, Joe Rogan. These were all podcasts that were to guys that don't always actually turn out and vote. Some of them are politically disengaged. And he reached them, he reassured them, he spoke to them the way they wanted to. For 2 or 3 hours at a time, they got to listen to him when they were driving in their car to work or they were training at the gym. And best believe that made sure those young guys or those mid-age guys turned out to vote for him in their droves. And I also think, and this is an important thing that people forget, something like 48% of women turned out and voted for Trump, including minorities like Hispanic, like Black. That is huge. And I think him being able to put himself across as a human and humanize himself through the campaign by doing long form podcasts was a vital part of it. And I think we're going to see more of that. I think the earlier question about people voting for personality, that is going to continue because people are going to be able to put their personality across more so than the pre-scripted auto prompter speeches that you see at rallies. They're going to go on podcasts and they're going to be able to have conversations. And I think anyone that listened to the Rogan podcast or the one on Andrew Schultz's show would have been like, wow, okay, this is pretty cool. Also, I'm going to give a shout out as well. Anyone that watched Trump on the Bryson DeChambeau YouTube channel when they played golf and they tried to break 50, he came across so well on that as well. And he was also really good at golf, which kind of makes him like quite endearing, because a lot of people used to say he was a cheat and he was rubbish and whatever else as well, and he didn't really win the club championships, but he's actually really good, and I think that added to him as well. Number 20, what's your looks maxing jaw routine? I think this is a jovial question, but I do have a strong jawline, and I think it mostly comes from having low body fat for me personally. However, I have seen the big trends online for, it's called mewing, and I've seen these jaw trainers. I might have told this story before when I was a guest in the podcast, but one of the first product like collabs that I got offered when I grew a following on Instagram, when it was my brother and I, we did CamBros as a fitness Instagram, was a jaw trainer. And the efficacy of those things back then, it was basically like a ball, like a gag that you put in your mouth. And I think they might have come a long way since then, and you might be able to get something that's actually works. But I don't have a looks maxing jaw routine. Maybe I'll look into it if I want to continue to try and grow that jaw. But I think my jawline's hopefully quite defined. Number 21, how do you track your goals and how do you ensure you stay on track when obstacles arise? I am somebody that's said numerous times that I'm not amazing at setting big long-term goals, but I am very good at setting processes that I think will enable me to work towards goals or in the direction of something that I want to work towards. And I regularly check in on myself in terms of my diary on a daily and a weekly basis, and I plan it out. And when obstacles arise, I have lots of different little frameworks and things that I do to ask myself to see if I'm doing the right things or I'm in alignment with myself. So, for example, if I'm gratitude journaling at night, one of the prompts that I've got is, how will I improve? And that'll be things like, I mentioned that I wanted to do more written work today on this particular topic, whether it's me writing a sales module for the upcoming sales masterclass that I'm doing, or whether it's me writing a challenging presentation for a new customer that I'm pitching for that I'm a little bit of uncertainty about. I'll sometimes say, like, how will I improve? I will spend more time and attention doing the hard written work that I said I was going to do, or I will spend more time and attention not playing on my phone, or I will spend more time and attention, and then insert whatever phrase comes next to me. And that helps me to ensure that I'm knowing on a daily basis that I'm working towards the things that I said I was going to do. Beyond that, and in terms of obstacles, one of the best things that I've done is create an identity about who I am as a person, and then try and match my habits and routines to that. There's a silly clip that got pulled from an episode maybe 6-7 months ago, and I said something like, if I want to be a 7-figure sales director, I better sell some fucking furniture then. And I really, really mean that. So, for example, when the obstacles arise, and I've told myself that I'm a 7-figure sales guy, then the obstacles are neither here nor there, because I'm going to have to overcome them if I want to be the person I said I was going to be. In the same way, if you're somebody listening to this and you're thinking, I'm going to be a 6-figure business owner next year, or I'm going to be a loving father and family man, then regardless of the obstacles that come up or the temptations or the curveballs, you need to do things that align with that. So I think this question was asked with business in mind. Obstacles are always going to come. You just need to have a relentless focus on ensuring that you do the things that you said you were going to do when you said you were going to do them with the intensity and quality that you said you were going to do. And a lot of the obstacles will be things that you get to look back on in the future as fun stories or funny anecdotes of how you managed to get around them. Number 22, we're in the home straight now. What did you make of the decision to charge private schools VAT and the implications this could have? I was educated at a public school in Bearsden, and I'm very thankful for that education. And I think it was a great public school. And I think that you can get a great education in the public sector without paying for it. But I also think that you should absolutely have the choice to send your children to private school and not pay VAT on it. Yes, schools are getting away with charitable status, and there's people that are upset about that. And I don't know if it's entirely fair, but it's how things are at the moment. And we have, from the outside looking in, a creaking public education system where already kids are not getting the best possible education because class sizes are rising. We've got ridiculous curriculums where the woke agendas started to infiltrate schools. We are going to make teachers' jobs harder by increasing class sizes. And we're also going to hurt and challenge parents who are just on the cusp of sending their children to a school that they think is going to get them the best possible education. And I think it's wrong to add 20% to somebody's costs just because the Labour government have got some sort of agenda where they think it's elitism to go to a private school. I actually think if you want to send your kids to that school and you think it's going to get them a better education, then that is absolutely your prerogative. And I think the state having a tax grab on that is distasteful in the extreme. I think it will hurt the public sector because kids who are on the periphery of going to private school will come out of that and will become busier and be pushed into the class. And a lot of those kids will have parents that are extremely driven and pushy for them to do well and will probably take up more of the teacher's resource and time than the children who are already in the school. And I think that can only be a bad thing. From a tax perspective, I think, and this is, I think we'll probably put tax in the title of this episode. The tax environment that the UK is creating is overall, in every shape and form they're trying to do, a tax grab. It is reducing people who want to do better and are aspirational and who are contributing members of society worse and worse and worse. Because people must understand, if you're sending your kid to a private school, you are already paying the same amount of tax as somebody else, perhaps more, for the schooling system. They don't take it off your bill because you've sent your kid to a private school and then they're going to charge 20% on top of that. Oh, it's just laughable. And I find the tax situation that we're coming into really frustrating. I hope we turn a corner. I think it's a number of years away. I think the election of Trump in the US will hopefully push for a sensible, right of centre, fiscal, social party that's going to make a big difference to the options that we have in the UK. I think the tide is turning in terms of public opinion and we're going that way, but the last election is still going to have a hangover and the Conservative Party in the current guise is nowhere near what we want or what we need, but somebody has to step in and fill that void and help us to try and right these wrongs, because at the moment the tax environment is going to get worse and the Labour government will do it with glee. Number 23, in your experience, what are most people doing wrong in sales? Let's do two answers for this. I think the first thing that most people are doing wrong in sales is they are not following up and doing things when they said they would. I think it is incredibly common that somebody will overpromise and underdeliver in terms of timescales and in terms of quality. And that breaks the relationship of trust with the buyer very early on. I've said this many times before. I would rather be trusted than liked in a sales transaction, particularly if it's my first sales transaction with an individual, a company, or a customer. When you show up and you do the things that you said you were going to do on time with the quality and standard that you promised somebody to do, you will build reassurance and you will build a customer that is going to be sticky and stay with you and be pleased to do business with you and pay you a fair rate for both parties. The vast majority of businesses and customers are too often falling short of that. And I think that is one of the most common things that people do wrong in sales, is they don't have a consistent and clear follow-up process, showing up and delivering on what they said they were going to do. Most businesses have a pretty good product and a pretty good service that they know meets their customers' needs, but often they don't follow up in the way that they should do in terms of following up on a lead or following up on a quote and following up in terms of fulfillment. And that is a grave, grave error. Number two, and second part to this answer, I would say is that they don't communicate their value as much as they could do. I think maybe it's a UK thing, but I think we sell on price far too often in the UK and we focus far too much on cost as the most important factor for a customer. And something I've gotten much better at doing is articulating value and the impact or effect of my product or service on my customer and what that becomes worth to them. Now, that sounds like a lot of filler words, but what I'm talking about is if your customer is in A position and they want to get to B position, you consider yourself the bridge for them to get to A to B, and you outline what are the pain points if you don't get to B. What are the pain points if you get to B, but not in as fast a time as I can get you there? What are the pain points if you get to B, but it turns out that B wasn't the right direction or destination for you because you didn't have a consultative salesperson that was able to tell you where you might want to end up instead? You maybe were aiming for C, and if you'd only spoken to an expert, you might have found out that's where you wanted to go. These are things that you can do through good quality questions. I've got a little framework I've been using in that space, and it will also enable you to charge a price that the customer can then see is a fairer price rather than just throwing your price out there, throwing your cost out there and getting negotiated down until it's right at the bare bones of what you can do from a margin and profitability perspective, and the customer just pays you whatever they think is fair. But that is almost a wrap for this one. And the last question, and just based on how this weekend has been going, I'm recording this on a Saturday night. XRP, that's the question. Are you retiring on your XRP profits? The answer is no, but I am going to tell you that XRP is looking good and I am very excited. It is long overdue. I spoke about the impact of a Trump presidency and how important that has been for the markets, and crypto has responded so well, and I'm so pleased to see it go in that direction. XRP is something I've held for a very long time. I'm a big believer in it for what they can do for the financial system. I think the case with the SEC is being banished into the background, and I think the likes of Trump and some of the guys that he's going to bring into his administration are going to enable crypto to continue pumping. Important disclaimer: the crypto market is cyclical. We are in a bull cycle, so please be careful. Take your time with your investments. If you have strict profit targets that you set that you are happy with, so for example, I think it was at 122 at one point today, $1.22. It's been at lows of like 43 when I've been buying it. So my XRP is in significant profit. If I have told myself that I was happy with making more than 2x on my investment, then I should hold the line on that promise that I made to myself and take the winnings off the table, or at least move it into something else that I want to in terms of out of that particular coin. And I think some people will get what I call ideas above their station and chase a figure that may never come. I think people were today talking online about $7. Now, I would bite your hand off if XRP is going to go to $7, but I also know that there's very few investments you can buy which are going to more than double in terms of their returns. So my XRP is looking great. My Bitcoin's looking great. ETH's looking extremely positive because I was buying that at lows. I have a lot of Borg as well, which is Swissborg, the exchange that I use as native token. That's not taken off yet. It was about 19 cents. And I'm very confident of over $1 on that one. So I'm in a great position. I'm in no rush to take all my profits and take them off the table. But I want the guys that are listening that have got a lot staked in that space, remember what your targets were and don't get carried away by the hype. But that is quite enough. We've just coming up for the hour mark. Those 24 questions have been answered. I want to say a massive thank you for your continued support. All I'm going to ask is I don't put loads and loads of sponsors on these shows and fill up the adverts. So please do subscribe, leave a rating if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and take the time to share this episode or one of your recent favorite ones with a friend or family member. We really do grow one recommendation at a time. And we'll be back to speak to you all again very, very soon.